So, does anybody remember how I was ranking draft picks? No? How about at the back? All right. So I went off the board and I went all over the place. I went with 31 through 35, the last video I did. Let's do number 2 draft picks. There you go. Top 15 number 2 draft picks of all time. Honorable mentions. This is going to be such a contentious list. Honorable mentions: Jason Spezza, Tom Lysiak, Wolf Paymont, Danny Heatley, Alexei Yashin, Dave Babich, Peter Nedved, Ryan Walter, David Legwan, Jimmy Carson, Bobby Ryan. You get the idea. There are a lot of players I could have put in the top 15. Number 15. And yes, this is why I'm doing this today. I did a list of a bunch of draft positions while I was on holiday. And number 2 was on the list, so I figured I'll go with 2. Trevor Linden at 15, Vancouver's number 2 pick in 1988. Had a very solid career, and it's easy to forget that the guy scored over 800 points. The guy played well over 1,000 games and was a leader. He was a leader wherever he played. Good team guy. And, of course, polarizing figure right now among the Vancouver fans. But thankfully, I'm wearing a Kansas City jersey, so Kansas City represent. Oh, they don't have a team? Good. Perfect. I can't. There can't be a problem. 14. Kirk Muller, New Jersey, 1984. So there was this kid named Mario that's drafted first overall in 1984, meaning that Muller, despite having a solid career, playing very well throughout his career, he's kind of a forgotten guy. He really is. Kirk Muller was the number 2 draft pick, and he was a very solid draft pick by New Jersey Devils, and went on to have a very solid career of his own. So I can't use the word solid many more times. So there you go. Number 13. If Brian Bellows' kid turns out to be anywhere near the offensive player that Brian Bellows was in his career after being drafted number 2 by Minnesota, Kiefer Bellows is going to be a keeper. Brian Bellows came in with a lot of hoopla for the North Stars. Some seasons he seemed to live up to it, some seasons he didn't. But honestly, one of my favorite North Stars at the time. Went on to have a very solid career. Played for a long, long time. And one of the top point producers among number 2 draft picks. Not much else for me to add. I know he'll never be in the NHL Hall of Fame, so he'll eventually end up in mine. We'll put it that way. Number 12. Hey, look, a current player. Eric Staal, Carolina Hurricanes, 2003. Eric Staal had that 100-point season in 05-06. And he had a 40-goal season this past year. And in between, he's been a pretty solid player. He has disappointed at times, which is why he's at 12 and not higher. But Eric Staal has easily been the best of the Staal brothers. I don't think I'm talking out of turn to say it. Jordan Staal was a number 2 pick as well, but Eric is definitely the better of the two. Tremendous career. I have no problem putting him ahead of these 3. The tough decisions are on the way, though. Beginning with number 11. I'm doing the historical videos. I have yet to reach this guy being drafted. 1963 was the first NHL entry draft. And Pete Mahovlich was the number 2 pick of the Detroit Red Wings. Mahovlich, legend in the game. And his stats are pretty fantastic considering the era he played in. And yeah, I've got him at 11. And it bothers me at some point, or on some level, because even though the guy who's at number 10, I know belongs at number 10, I look at the length of Mahovlich's career, and there's guys ahead of him, and this is where it gets really hard. It's not easy to figure this out. This is why I had all these numbered, and then when I looked at them again before doing this video, I changed some of them. Because it is that hard. Number 10. Current player. 2009, Victor Hedman, Tampa Bay. There were rumors the day that Tampa Bay took Hedman that the Canucks offered their first pick, Higgins. I don't remember if it was Edler. There was some rumor out there that Brian Burke threw out there that the Canucks tried to take him down for. Tampa would have just thrown that rumor aside. Like, that offer just would have been garbage. And honestly, kudos to the Canucks for trying, because Victor Hedman's exactly the kind of defenseman the Vancouver Canucks have never had in their history. Guy's a beast. I think he's only starting to enter his prime. I think if I do this again in 5 years, he's much higher on the list than 10th. Hedman's pretty fantastic. Number 9. Patrick Marleau, I don't think he's ever going to retire. Drafted in 1997 and not brought along slowly by San Jose. They threw him to the Wolves. And he did pretty well for a guy who was thrown to the Wolves, although he didn't reach his scoring potential until a few years into his career. Basically at the point where we said, he'll never be the guy he was drafted to be, he became the guy he was drafted to be, as if he was paying attention to what we were all saying. And had a pretty solid career for San Jose, and now is performing pretty well for Toronto, and is one of those forgotten guys with Tavares coming in, and Matthews, Marner, and Nylander, and all this. And it's kind of easy to forget that Marleau performed pretty well and still doesn't look old. Number 8. New York Rangers draft pick Brad Park, 1966. When I started watching hockey, Brad Park was with Detroit. He played for the Rangers, Boston, Detroit. Fantastic defenseman throughout his career. Overshadowed by Bobby Orr. You want to talk about a guy who you get overshadowed by? Bobby Orr is the ultimate guy to get overshadowed by. Brad Park, though, very, very solid career. Played a long time for the Bruins, and I have a Brad Park jersey because I was a fan of the guy. Even when he was older in Detroit, I thought he was still a solid offensive defenseman. Put up some tremendous totals. Again, he would get talked about more, but that Bobby Orr kid was pretty good too. Number 7. I don't think Tyler Seguin has had that season yet. I think we look at the seasons that were had by both Taylor Hall and Nate McKinnon of Colorado this year, or this past season. I think Seguin is still waiting for that season with Dallas, and he's got the line mates to do it with Jamie Benn. He's got the line mate to do it, and if it's the two of them and Radulov, it's there. And what I mean is like 110-point season. Seguin has that kind of offensive ability. I remember when he was a rookie and he was sitting on the bench in the playoffs, I was livid. There were a lot of Bruins fans that were livid because we could see the talent with Seguin, and we wanted Claude Julien desperately to give him a chance, and it just wasn't happening, and it drove us insane. But hey, these things happen, right? Number 6. If you're going to draft and reach for the sky at a draft, do it the way that Brian Burke did it in 99. He comes out with both Sedin twins. And he could have drafted Patrick Stefan, and he said, you know what? I want both Sedin twins. And he went into it saying, I'm getting both, and he got both. And it was absolutely worth it. And Daniel being higher than some of these guys, yeah, it may bother some, but for me as a Canuck fan and as somebody who watched Sedin's entire career, I have no problem putting him ahead of these guys. And once the Sedins hit their prime and hit their stride, they were fantastic. And Daniel was the scorer of the two. They were both playmakers, though. Both Daniel and Henrik, what kind of doesn't get talked about a lot outside of, I think Vancouver fans will understand this, both Daniel and Henrik preferred to pass. If they had a line mate that was a sniper, they both preferred to pass to him. And that's why I think Daniel's goal scoring was never quite at the level that I think he was capable of. Not only that, but Henrik was a pretty good goal scorer himself too when he shot on net. It's sort of the Adam Oates role. Adam Oates was very much a guy who, if he had shot more, I think he would have had 300-400 goals in his career, 500 goals in his career. But some guys just prefer to pass, and Daniel's included in that. So sometimes there's less highlight reel goals for a player because they're a passer first. Number 5. This might be the West Coast fan in me, admittedly, but Drew Doughty in LA is a beast. Him staying in LA for another 8 years, of course. LA had to lock him down. He is their defense. He is kind of fantastic. Drew Doughty's one of those guys that I look at, and again, you've got Doughty and you've got Hedman. They're both guys that if the Canucks ever had that defenseman. Anyways, Doughty, he can hit, he can score, he can do pretty much anything. I know Vegas fans got in his head a little bit this past spring, but I wouldn't bet against him having a huge bounce back. And clearly he believes that LA is still in a position to contend and will be going forward. We'll see how smart a move that was for him, but I would anticipate that by the time his career is over, he may be threatening first on this list. But to get there, he's got to pass this guy. I didn't like this guy as a player. And there's rumors out there that he may end up becoming the president for the Vancouver Canucks. And I'm not entirely a fan, although Chris Pronger gets on the safety committee and then gets into the Florida Panthers organization. Clearly, he is a popular guy off the ice. Clearly, people like him off the ice, but on the ice, some of the stuff he did was reprehensible. And I'm being honest about that. And it overshadows the fact that he was a really, really talented player who proved people remember who was number 2, Alexander Daigle. You remember who number 2 is when number 2 is so good, he makes number 1 look like number 2. And Chris Pronger had a fantastic career. Hart Trophy as a blue liner is very, very impressive. He was a big part of the reason why the Oilers went to the Stanley Cup Final in 06, and part of the reason why they fell apart in 06, 07, and then Anaheim won the Cup in 07. He was a winner, and he eventually proved it. Unfortunately, the suspensions and some of his actions overshadow some of his greatness. It's the same problem I have with Brad Marchand. I like Marchand as a player when he's playing hockey, but when he does some of that crap, people always ask me, how can you cheer for the Bruins, Brad Marchand? Because he's fantastic 98% of the time. It's that other 2%. And Pronger, I didn't follow the teams he played on a whole lot until we were against him in the playoffs, or it was a really important game. So odds are I saw all of his crappy play in those big games, and he may have been fantastic in the other ones. Number 3. Brendan Shanahan. And at some point, we'll need to discuss how Brendan Shanahan became a member of the St. Louis Blues. Because it's a fascinating story. And it reveals why the NHL changed the whole arbitration system for free agents and whatnot. Because it was chaos. And we never got to see just how good Shanahan might have been with Scott Stevens in New Jersey. Shanahan, before he became the man with the Shana plan in Toronto, was Brendan Shanahan, the player, pretty damn good. And then he went to Detroit, and he showed just how solid he was in the playoffs. And honestly, he was one of those guys who went to Detroit. And while it had been the butt of jokes up until the mid-90s that guys go to Detroit just to cash in and lose in the playoffs, Shanahan was part of that new conversation with guys like Brett Hull, even Luc Robitaille towards the end of his career. They go there to win. And Shanahan was a winner, and he's proving in Toronto. As the guy in charge, he's still a winner. Number 2. This is honestly the toughest of all of the lists I did. Figuring out number 2 and number 1 among the number 2 draft picks was really, really tough, and I'll get into that. Number 2. Evgeni Malkin, Pittsburgh Penguins. Art Ross, check. Conn Smythe, yep. 2 Art Ross trophies, check. He is one of the best players in the game. And he's perfectly fine playing behind Crosby, but anytime Crosby got hurt, Malkin stepped up. It's not like when Crosby got hurt, Malkin just shied away from the play, and he wasn't a key guy. He was the key guy, and he stepped up. And he's the one guy on this list that you could argue played secondary minutes behind some of the other guys behind him. And it would be very easy for somebody to do this same list I've done and argue that Malkin belongs somewhere after Doughty. But 3 Stanley Cup rings, and the fact that he wasn't a passenger in any of them. I remember the 2016 run, and I know there's still videos on the channel from the 2016 run, where I said, Pittsburgh's got this far in the playoffs. If Malkin wakes up, oh my God, they're scary. And then Malkin woke up. It was within a game or two of me saying that. And once he gets going, once he's on his horse, he's much like a guy who isn't on this list, Sasha Barkov. And Barkov is not as offensively talented as Malkin, but he's a pretty damn solid forward. And don't be surprised if I do this 5 years from now if Sasha Barkov's on the list. But Malkin belongs at number 2. Number 1, there really isn't a doubt for anybody who saw him play. And I did. It's easy to forget. Marcel Dionne was drafted number 2 overall by the Detroit Red Wings in 1971. Detroit was a traffic jam. It was awful. It was just crap. Players were jumping out. We're not waiting for this whole thing to get figured out. We're done. We're out of here. And nobody wanted to go to Detroit. And once Dionne went to L.A., his career took off. And he was already a scorer before he got to L.A. It's not like Detroit traded him not knowing what he was. They traded him thinking, well, and what they got back was, and it's because Detroit was run horribly at the time. So you've got Shanahan here, who eventually goes to Detroit, where Ken Holland's putting together Stanley Cup winners. And at 1, you've got Marcel Dionne, who's going to the Kings, which was also not a greatly run franchise, but you had the Triple Crown line of Dionne, Simmer, and Taylor, which was fantastic. And really, Marcel Dionne is a guy that you look at and you say, of the greats who never won a Stanley Cup, he has got to be top 5. Marcel Dionne was unfortunate in that he played during the era of Guy Lafleur, which then became the era of Wayne Gretzky. He got an Art Ross trophy. He tied for points with Wayne Gretzky the first year Gretzky was in the NHL, but he had more goals. So because he had more goals than Gretzky, he got that Art Ross. Dionne played for a very long time with LA, ended up finishing his career with the Rangers. Sadly, he never did get that Stanley Cup. But to me, he's still the number 1 draft pick in the number 2 spot. I could not justify putting Malkin ahead of Dionne or Shanahan or Pronger or anything. And again, most people watching this video, judging by age ranges according to my statistics, most people won't have seen Dionne play who are watching this. And honestly, that's a shame, because Dionne was really quite creative with the puck. He was not a very tall player. If you look at pictures of him, he kind of looks stocky, but he was deceptively fast on the ice, and he had one of the best sets of hands that ever played the game. He just happened to play when Gretzky did. And that Guy Lafleur guy, who was also pretty good as well. So he was a victim of not being as good as the megastars that ran the game when he played. But excellent career. One of the top, I think he's still 5th all-time in points. I think he's behind Gretzky, Messier, Jágr. Well, Jágr's past Messier, Howe, and then I think it's Dionne at 5. But either way, one of the best players, and he went through some really rough times as a player as well. So there you go. Top 15, number 2 draft picks of all time. Let me know your picks in the comment section below. I mean no slight to anybody I didn't include on the list. But, again, let me know your picks. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And hey, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.